anytime I get in front of a group of educators, I say it's easy for civilians. Well, it's not easy, but they see us in uniform, and so they can recognize readily that we're military, and they say thank you for your service, and I'm grateful for that every time. The teachers that are out there, though, you are blended in, and you're not recognized as often as you should be. And the listeners of the podcast, please know also that we are grateful for your service of what you do for the youth of the United States of America or wherever you're teaching. We know of the daily sacrifices, the grind. We know of the ups and downs from parents and administration and everything else. So we are grateful for you putting in the time, getting helping those individuals and having those great musical experiences and continuing to do so online. Holy cow. It's a challenging time.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the good fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. Are you planning to travel with your group sometime soon? If so, please consider my sponsor, Kaleidoscope Adventures, a full-service tour company specializing in student group travel. With a former educator as its CEO, Kaleidoscope Adventures is dedicated to changing student lives through travel, and they offer high-quality service and an attention to detail that comes from more than 25 years of student travel experience. Trust Kaleidoscope's outstanding staff to focus on your group's one-of-a-kind adventure so that you can focus on everything else. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio-on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you knew one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now on to my next guest, Major Joseph Hansen. Hi, Joe. How are you?
Hi, Mark. Doing great. Thanks again for having me on.
Joe, if you can do me a favor, can you introduce yourself for our guests so everyone knows who you are?
Sure thing. And thanks again for this opportunity, Mark. I'm a big fan of the podcast. And again, as I mentioned to you earlier, it's pretty breathtaking, the amount and breadth of people that you've had come through. I think it'll take me the rest of my career just to listen to all the podcasts you've done in the last 2 or 3 years. But honored to be here and honored to speak on behalf of Air Force bands. So I'm a native Coloradan, grew up in a small town called Gunnison, Colorado, in the western slope, small town up in the mountains. And I grew up as a trombonist. That's my primary instrument, trombone and piano. And I was really lucky that I was around exceptional music teachers, even from a young age, both choir directors, band directors, people that took time, teaching private lessons to even providing lessons when we didn't have the money to pay for it. And driving me all across the state to honor bands. We were a small school, so sometimes I was the only student that was going off to Greeley, Colorado, or Denver, or Colorado Springs. And so I'm especially grateful and always want to say my public praise to those teachers, middle school, elementary, and high school that helped me to learn to love music and to see myself as a future educator, as a conductor, as a military member who's dedicated their life to continuing to grow in that way. So that took me to college. I was one day my choir director in high school said to me, "Do you want to go to BYU and become a band director someday?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." I just never thought about it in that way. And so that's what took me to Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. And I knew right away music education was going to be my course. I took 2 years off of music and was a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the Philippines for 2 years, which opened my eyes to a different culture, to a different language, and for once in my life being the minority in many ways. And so I learned a lot in that life experience, and that's helped continue to change my perspectives and affect who I am. And then I came back to college and kept working on trombone and came out with my music education degree and ended up as a school teacher in Colorado Springs. And my full plan was to be a high school band director and to live in the same house and work at the same school for my whole career. And I did enjoy my teaching years. I got the chance to teach at all three levels while I was a band director in Colorado Springs, and a little bit of orchestra as well. And then at that time, that's when I found out about military music. I had no knowledge about military bands, except maybe that they marched in parades or something like that. I had no idea about what it meant to be a soldier or an airman or a sailor or Coast Guardsman as a military musician, until I saw the Air Force Academy band live when I was a school teacher in Colorado Springs, and know some of the musicians, and I brought them in as clinicians to working with my students. And what a resource! Number one, that I discovered that there were local professional musicians who would come for free and work with my students. It was pretty unbelievable at the time when I discovered it. And I grew up only 3 hours away. I never knew about Air Force musicians. And so I enjoyed working with saxophonists and trombonists. And finally, I had the commander. The conductor at the time was Colonel Larry Lang, who was a great friend and a great colleague and mentor to me, and has been throughout my career. And he helps me get prepared and interested in becoming a conducting applicant for the Air Force. And I was still continuing to study myself. I was a private student of Ray Kramer, who resided in the area there of Colorado Springs, and he kindly taught me some private lessons and helped me prepare for my conducting audition. And it all worked out. Heaven be praised. And since that time, I'm coming up on 11 years now, active duty in the Air Force, in my fourth assignment, and it's been a great blessing. So that's in a nutshell, kind of my upbringing in music.
Yeah, sure. So 11 years in the Air Force. How many years did you teach in Colorado Springs?
I taught 3 years. My first job was elementary/high school. So by day in the morning I was leading the marching band, jazz band. I taught some guitar class and was helping also managing the department as a department head. And then I would go a couple afternoons each week to lead an elementary program of beginning band and beginning orchestra students. So that was an interesting, eye-opening experience, seeing a little bit of everything from guitar to the strings. And so I was extremely grateful, and I did everything that my master class, my woodwind method, and my string teachers in college told me. And they said, you will teach guitar at some point. You will teach strings at some point. And they were completely right. And I was grateful for that. And then my last job was actually as a middle school band director, which I loved. And it was a fantastic program on the west side of Colorado Springs, and fantastic tradition of bands. I was only the third band director in the history of the school in 40 years. And so I inherited a fantastic program with fantastic kids, fantastic parents. And I would still be there today if it weren't for this other opportunity that presented itself in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know that area quite well. I got my master's in Boulder, and my brother currently lives in Pueblo.
Oh, sure.
So I know the Front Range pretty well. And of course, I know the part of Colorado you're from. I just haven't been over there much. The Western Slope is very different than the Front Range. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's within distance, but it's within driving distance. But yeah, you gain a lot of elevation pretty quick going up, going over Monarch Pass, and but it's beautiful part of the country.
Yeah, no doubt. So I want to ask you about that that first year you were teaching, and you said you were doing the high school band, and then you were going over a couple weeks for the elementary school. How many days a week were you seeing the elementary band and orchestra students?
So I believe it was Monday and Wednesday afternoons where I would depart from the high school, and I would have back-to-back classes, and I had a fourth grade beginning string class. And this is a very small school, just I don't even remember how many kids. I think less than 100 total in the school. hands-on, very close, small numbers, and it was also a Title X school, so in a poorer part of the city, but great kids. And so a couple afternoons a week, I'd go over and do the fourth grade orchestra, fifth grade orchestra, and then the fifth grade beginning band class.
So I want to ask you, when you were in high school, you said that you had that person, your choir director, right, who said, "Do you want to go study music?" Had you thought about it before that? Had you thought about becoming a professional musician in any capacity?
I had, yeah. I was your classic music enthusiast as a student that loved trying new instruments, loved trying to write music and learning about music theory. And I had the chance to take the beginning music theory class we didn't have it offered in my high school, but I was able to take it at the local college, Western State College at the time, and be a part of their choirs and their bands. And so it was a great time. For a small town and a small school, I had an amazing breadth of experiences and some great musicians that helped me along the way. And then put that on top of honor bands and other places, just got to play under some really, really great conductors. Tom Leslie, who was on your show, I remember him he was an all-state band conductor at one point, and Timothy Marr. So wonderful people for me to watch. And even at that stage where it wasn't until later on where I think I thought I'd like to be a conductor. That was later on for me, but as a composer or other ideas at the time, definitely helped contribute and push me in that direction later on.
Sure. And so you mentioned that 3 years in, you went and saw the Air Force Band. Was that the inspiration to join the Air Force? How did that happen? Can you talk me through that a little more carefully?
I will. Yeah. So, again, I had no prior knowledge about anything military music. I remember one Army band recruiter came to me, or came to our ensemble and gave a little briefing and talked about it. And it wasn't at the best time. It was Fallujah had just happened during the kind of the peak of the Iraq War. And the briefing just did not go well, and so that idea went out of my mind completely. But I had other aspirations anyway. I wanted to be a band director, and I had very specific goals in that time of my life. So I met a friend at church when I became a band director who told me about his life as a saxophonist in an Air Force band, and he told me about performing concerts with a jazz band around the country or around a geographic region, and talking about what the Air Force does for music and inspiring patriotism in those who've served, or talking about our country and what the Department of Defense does. And it also happened that I lived in a very military heavy community. A lot of my friends outside of work and outside of church were members of the military, and so that was the desire just kind of began to grow for me, and I was considering other things besides just music. But I knew that music was the passion. That's the profession that I wanted to stick with. So when I got the opportunity to audition as a conductor and to join the military, that was the natural path for me.
Sure, yeah. And I know that Colorado Springs area does have a bit of a military presence, correct? There's Fort Carson there, the Air Force Academy. There's a couple of...
Yeah, Peterson Air Force Base and Schriever Air Force Base, and Buckley Air Force Base is up in Denver. So it's a strong presence and a big part of the community.
So when you did make the decision to join the Air Force, and it's funny that you mentioned this, it's really, when I was a high school teacher, there was an FBI agent came to give a presentation, and he tried to recruit me into the FBI.
Yeah.
He was like, "You'd be great in the FBI." And yeah, that was never going to happen for me. It was just, that doesn't fit me, who I am. But I know that sort of that feeling of like, okay, wait a minute, there's something here I hadn't ever really considered before. That I had that same thing wash over me, like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, and certainly.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, you might have some listeners in your podcast that are thinking about their careers and their trajectories, and there might be someone on this podcast thinking, I would never want to be a military band person. or didn't know anything about the audition process. So the Air Force is still looking for qualified officers and the band officers and conductors in the future. So I hope I can help explain that later on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I mentioned earlier before we started recording, I have lots of friends who were formerly in the Air Force Band, the Mid-America Band in particular, here where I am in the St. Louis area. And, I think they all valued their service, and, especially I have a couple of friends who are woodwind players who, did their entire time, their 20 years, and, now they're teaching in the area and doing other things. Robert Jordan, the bassoonist, is one of them. He's doing quite well now, making his own bassoons. And yeah, there's a definite career path there.
It opens a lot of doors, and it certainly gives a lot of experiences. I've been very grateful in the 4 assignments that I've had of 2 deployments and seeing 10 different countries. And as you said, it opens a lot of doors with things that you can do after as well. People that have gone on to make bassoons or gone on to manage websites and IT and all sorts of different jobs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, let's talk a little bit about that moment of when you finally decided to join the Air Force. You must have had to audition. What was that process like for you?
Right. So we are a very small career field compared to the Air Force as a whole. So within the active duty, we have active duty bands. We have 10 bands that are across the globe with 16 officers total. So the commissioned officers are the conductors. We're also the commanders of the band. That's my present job, is being the commander of the Air Force Band of the Golden West out here in California. And then there's about 630 enlisted musicians who are the instrumentalists, the vocalists, the audio engineers, and everybody who also are participants in the band. And so auditions are ongoing in all of our specialties, all the instruments and vocal specialties as well. All of the information is on our website. COVID has had to turn off some of those during the season, during the spring and summer, but we're starting to advertise again. In fact, we have a clarinet audition coming up in September, and all the information is online. Basically, you practice the materials, send in some links on YouTube or a DVD if we're still doing that. And then basically, if you pass that round, then we will give you a live invitation to come and perform for us and compete in the final round. So my audition was similar to that. In 2009, when I was auditioning as a conductor, there's also a conducting audition. I sent in materials, resume, and everything that I had done at that point, and a DVD of myself conducting, and I was invited to the live audition in Washington, D.C. with 15 or 16 other people, and it varies from year to year how many come and how many auditions we're able to do. I was actually almost an Army band musician. In between the time when I was waiting to see an audition for the Air Force, my desire was so strong that I went off and auditioned for the Colorado Army Guard Band as a pianist, and so got close to going there first. But then the Air Force Band audition came along, and being a conductor was what I really wanted to do. And so the Army recruiter understood. He helped me. Helping me to, once I passed the audition, to transition to the Air Force commitment. So the audition itself is 3 rounds. You go in and you have prepared pieces and a little bit of sight reading as well, conducting the Air Force Band, our premier band there in Washington, D.C., which is phenomenal. Just an outstanding group of women and men, instrumentalists and vocalists. So perform with them, and then there's a music theory test, music theory component, ear training, and then if you can get through those, there's a third round of an interview before they can offer you a position. And so it's pretty rigorous, but we have found some exceptional musicians over the years. And the first commitment is 4 years, and some people have chosen to do their 4 years and go off to other things, go off to doctorates in conducting or becoming orchestral directors out in the world, or pursuing other paths. And some of us try and continue on and stay for the whole career. And that's kind of it in a nutshell of how the audition process works. It's similar for other instruments, including audio engineers who were auditioning as well, looking at experience and then putting them through the ringer of mixing live sound and troubleshooting a soundboard. And so all the specialties are greatly needed jobs. Composers
and arrangers as well, right?
That's correct. Yeah, we have a handful. There's not many also in the Air Force, but your friend Jeremy Martin, who I've worked with also in the past, assigned there to the Band of Mid-America, is an exceptional arranger and composer, and a really important asset for us in being able to go out and do these concerts in various places.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's a fascinating. It requires a fascinating skill set to be able to do that, because you're not just arranging for a concert band; you're arranging for all kinds of crazy things that could pop up.
That's correct. Yeah, I have a very fine arranger here at our band, Staff Sergeant David Dormius, who just in his first year had an unbelievable amount of projects, and we try and do some things that nurture the composer's soul as well. We have a brand new CD, an album that we're going to premiere that has one of his compositions on it called "Sound of Unity."
Right.
Where it's 100% from him and from his soul. I didn't ask for anything. It just said compose for concert band for our instrumentation, and he went and wrote a beautiful piece. But then we've also asked him to compose for big band, for the quintets, for the rock band, and so he's been integral in helping us and being able to be ready to go out and perform in many different groups.
Yeah, I'm just trying to connect it to sort of a broader movement in music education towards more creativity, more flexibility, more diversity in our curricula, and I think this is a good example of it, is these kinds of jobs like this that are becoming not only through the military bands, but more common, in just the general music world.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I'm a fan on being creative and giving musicians the opportunity to be creative. Not just restrictive to the traditional groups and traditional instrumentation, traditional sounds that we're used to. Although I certainly love our musical heritage, and we have a lot of great music that we continue to perform. But the music of the future is unique and exciting.
So I was looking at the Air Force Band's webpage as you were talking, and so you mentioned that there's 10 regional bands, then the Air Force Academy Band and the Air Force Band in Washington, D.C. And that's only 16 officers for all of these?
Correct. Not every band has an officer.
Oh, okay.
So there are smaller bands. Office Air Force Base in Nebraska is led by a Chief Master Sergeant, and then our band at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, also led by a Chief Master Sergeant. And we have one dual location band, which is the commander lives in Japan at Yokota Air Base, and then Chief Master Sergeant is in charge of the detachment at Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii.
Oh, I see. Okay. I see. That's really interesting, the way it's organized. It's different than the other service bands. Can you talk a little bit about the way the Air Force is different from, say, the Army bands or the Navy bands, et cetera?
Yeah, and I talk to my friends that are in the Navy often about their experience. So the Navy and the Marines, they hire conductors from within. They hire their officers from their enlisted personnel. So like Colonel Fedig, he talked about being a clarinetist.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a performer in the band. And my other friends, one's a horn player, one's another trombone player, who are then selected to go the route to then become a conductor and a commissioned officer in their service. And part of also the enlisted world is there's an Army and Navy School of Music, where after they go to basic training, they're sent to a music school where they're given further training, further development on their instruments and others, and additional training of becoming a military musician. The Air Force is a little bit different. We audition with we do not have a technical training school, or AIT as the Army calls it. So after basic training, our musicians come straight to us, including the officers. I think the Army also does audition for commissioned officers that are stationed at their largest band, at their premier band. The Air Force, all of our conductors are officers. We don't have warrant officers like the Army does, who are also conductors at their various bands. We also have a smaller amount of bands. So it's just a different system. They're all fine musicians, and I've really enjoyed the different joint opportunities I've had to have musical experiences with my friends in the Navy and the Marines and the Coast Guard, the Army, and other places across the country. We're just a little bit different that way.
Yeah, I was looking, I'm kind of like comparing the Navy band. It's also interesting to me as I look at the list of places where the bands are that there are certain places in the country where there are multiple bands stationed. Obviously, Washington is one, but for example, in Japan and also Pearl Harbor, there seems to be several bands at Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, and it's so the bands, I should talk about this too, is they're positioned in locations, and then they have an entire region that they support. So for our two bands in the Pacific, they have the total Indo-Pacific region where they travel and help support the Department of Defense, and sometimes partnering with the Department of State, doing a lot of embassy support performances. So our band in Japan has been to Vietnam, to Indonesia, to Tonga, to Australia, all across the region, and sing with the band at Hickam in Hawaii, going to Guam, as well as performing at Pearl Harbor and supporting the Pacific Air Force's commander there. But then also here in the United States, our region, us being here on the West Coast, we have the 5 most western states of Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, and Arizona. That's our region. And so during typical times, non-COVID, we are out and performing in communities across that region. And we are going with 8 different ensembles, from concert band to brass and woodwind quintets, clarinet quartet, big band, and rock band, in different directions, and going into communities large and small, saying thank you for your support of the United States Air Force. Thank you for the veterans who have come before us, who have served. And it's one of the more sobering parts of my job is playing that armed services medley, and having people like your dad, who served in World War II, stand up and proudly acknowledge their service and remember the times that they had serving their country. So it's a beautiful thing.
Where have you served in the Air Force? What bands have you been a part of, and what have you done during your career?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm in my 4th assignment. I began my career at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, serving as a flight commander down there. For my first commander was Captain Moore Urrutia, who is now assigned in Germany, Lieutenant Colonel now, and had some amazing experiences getting to know those musicians. And my first full-time job conducting on the professional level, learned a lot. Like you said, my pedigree in conducting and music education spanned from that fourth grader or younger with my own children up until the professional level. And so getting to know what's going on inside of the head of the performer has been something unique and interesting to me at all ranges, and something that I think about quite a bit leading from the podium. So I had 5 years there at Lackland Air Force Base, and then I was deployed. They sent me over to the Air Force's Central Command Band for 6 months. And so a little bit about deployed bands. For the Air Force, we have a steady presence called the Air Force Central Command Band that's located at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. And that band is tasked with supporting service members throughout the region. So CENTCOM, or Central Command, is the area of the globe that's divided up, a region of support of the United States military. And so part of our job was going around with a rock band and performing for our troops, bringing them a little taste of home, different countries and bases in the region, and also working with the Department of State. We performed in Saudi Arabia. We performed in Kuwait. On my second deployment in 2018, we went up to Central Asia and Kazakhstan and Tajikistan. We sent a band to Pakistan. And in many cases, we weren't only representatives of the U.S. Air Force, but of the United States of America. We were the only Americans that some people had seen. And it was a really neat and life-changing experience to watch what music can do, how music transcends language, how music can transcend cultures, and just be a legitimate show and feeling of goodwill, which we were able to do in many different missions, many different performances across the region. And so both of my deployments are just some experiences that I'll never forget. Bringing music to people that really needed it in bases in Afghanistan and throughout the region. And made me really grateful that the military employs bands. We are a unique capability of being able to make bridges and create different impressions than the other capabilities of the Air Force and the military. So that deployment took me to Washington, D.C. That was my next assignment. I was with the Air Force Band in D.C. And some remarkable experiences there. I was with the singing sergeants for a couple of years with the chorus. I worked with the Air Force Strings and toured through New England on a tour with them and watched them do their thing, doing their strolling strings, where they go and interact throughout the ensemble. I've been a part of funerals in Arlington National Cemetery for those who have fallen, those who've served in wars past and those who've served in wars present, who've had their final respects given in Arlington National Cemetery, which is also very sobering. Got to perform at the White House on the lawn, got to march in the inauguration. Many awesome experiences, and none that I say because I am awesome. I just say that it was humbling to be able to be there during those times, and learn and continue to grow as a conductor. And then I was taken out of music for 2 years. I was stationed at the Pentagon, which again I never thought I would ever live or work every day going to the Pentagon. I was outside of music for 2 years working for Air Force Public Affairs, which really opened my mind to what the Air Force does at the senior level. I was a staff officer who helps arrange think tank events for senior leaders in the Air Force who went out to different research organizations and academic institutions and universities and talked to people about national defense. Two-way communication. I watched generals, four-star generals, asking questions of experts out there and saying, what would you do in this case with this scenario, about wounded warrior care, about spiritual fitness, about all sorts of topics that general officers and senior civilians were asking. And then the second deployment, I talked about that. And then I landed here at Travis Air Force Base in California in 2018. It's my first time ever living in California. I've been a visitor several times, but it's a beautiful location. We're at Travis Air Force Base, which is about halfway between Sacramento and San Francisco, right here, close to Napa Valley. And within California itself, I've seen many beautiful communities and a strong sense of patriotism, and a lot of people who have given of themselves and served for their country. And so it's a really neat time in a very talented group of 60 musicians who I'm very lucky to work with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right along the I-80 corridor. I would drive past that between my college undergraduate and my home when I was an undergraduate.
That's right.
Yeah, so I know where Travis is. You know, I think you said a couple of interesting things there, and I don't want to dip in anything that's controversial. That's not what this podcast is about by any stretch of the imagination. But the first thing you said is that these four-star generals were asking questions in a two-way conversation, and I think that, you know, anyone who's successful knows that they don't have all the answers. I think that's a sign of strength.
It is.
You know, I think good leaders do ask questions of people and do seek outside opinion.
Absolutely. And I watched multiple general officers and senior enlisted leaders too, going to various audiences and listening about the research that's being done, about the writing and research that's being done out there, and the way that they can do and contribute to their job better and give the best military advice to our civilian leaders. The military is a non-political organization to its core, and so our leaders being able to provide that advice and expertise to our civilian leaders. That's what it all comes down to.
Right, absolutely. And I was also thinking about your comment about California. I think that's also something that's unfairly painted because of the political landscape, that somehow California is not patriotic, when that's not my experience in California by any stretch of the imagination.
Agreed, and that's I agree that is a fallacy. I've performed in concerts. A sobering time for me was that we played at the Hollywood Bowl. We were invited to be a part with the LA Philharmonic, and it was actually Nile Rodgers and Chic, if you remember the Chic band. So we came on the stage at the end of the concert and performed some marches with them. But I remember being in the audience earlier and watching God Bless America, America the Beautiful, and this huge crowd of, more than 10,000 people, I think 14 or 15,000 people in the audience, all of them with their cell phones in the air, recording, supporting, loving their country. And this is in LA, in Hollywood. Same thing that I've seen in San Francisco, same thing as I've traveled up and down the state. So it's also a population of people that love their country and support, besides the different beliefs that people have within the state about politics or whatever. We're grateful for the people that support our country.
You mentioned some teachers that were influential for you, and you mentioned teaching fourth graders, beginners, all the way through. But what lessons do you take from those music educators, or your experience as a music educator, that you use in your professional duties as a conductor of professional musicians?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think about it as my time as a performer too, as well as an educator, and the people that have been in ensembles around me. If I could go back and talk to myself in those stages, I would tell myself to spend more time with the people and getting to know them individually. And relationships were so important in having effective ensembles and having effective teaching moments, and of course, true today too, about building relationships within an organization, and then being able to do as much as we can going into the communities. And I'm grateful for those teachers that took the time for me to get to know me, to help me when I was having a hard day, or help me when I needed time to get through this hard part of developing as a musician, giving me space when I needed to also to find my own way. So yeah, that's been pretty steady through life of learning to overcome those things and cherishing the people along the way.
So I want to ask, what does the Air Force do for the rank and file band director? What can they are there any practical things that they can use the bands for, the musicians for? Like if they wanted to reach out and have some sort of help in some way, what would the Air Force provide for them?
Oh, awesome question. Thank you for asking that. And again, if I had known when I was band director at the resources available, I would have been calling much sooner. I did once I finally found out, and I was taking advantage. But even during the times when you're not around an Air Force band, say that you're in the middle of North Dakota or someplace away from where we have Air Force bands stationed, there are many resources that are out there, and especially during this COVID time. A blessing has been that the problem of distance is no longer a problem. We are doing interactive events. We're helping to provide master classes. I know that we're out for the summer now in most school districts, but send us a note. Find us on Facebook. Find us on Instagram. Send us a note about what we can do to provide an online learning opportunity or an online collaboration. My former unit at the Air Force Band, they have what's called the Duet Initiative, where a student sends in a video of themselves, and then it's mixed together with the duet partner, someone in the band. So just a really neat experience. Just a really neat thing for students to grab onto. And a lot of play-along things are out there. We just launched a trombone play-along excerpt. It's a little bit of Haydn from the Creation. Trombonist, our Technical Sergeant Ben Hughesby, put up an educational product there about where you can turn off one voice and play the different parts. And then there's just all sorts of resources we're continuing to build, from reed making skills to other strategies like venting in the bassoon. So getting into the nitty gritty about different instruments. It's just we're continually growing our outreach piece. And then in normal times, those communities, even if you're far away from an Air Force band, please do ask. Just ask the question, because in normal times we are traveling through from time to time, and we'd love to do a collaborative event with you. Love to play a march with your kids on the stage, or have them as a featured soloist with us. And I'm not just talking about classical music, but pop music and jazz music. We come fully equipped and able to engage. And so, yeah, check us out on our website. Check us out on our social media. And I wanted to say also, we have lots of signed recordings. If you go to music.af.mil, you should find some recordings. They're also on YouTube channels of the various bands. And there's, as well as compact discs. We're still making compact discs, but we are actually launching an album. We are printing discs, but we're also doing some digital downloads of a brand new album we're calling American Tapestry. We've got 4 brand new premieres just as of 2020. We recorded the whole thing right before COVID hit. And so we have an entire concert band album that's coming out with, it's got some Warhorse pieces on there. We recorded the second and third movement of New England Triptych by Schuman, and a little bit of music from Stephen Malillo. We've got a couple jazzy pieces on there too. So watch for American Tapestry and send us a note if we can send you a free CD. That's the blessing of the Air Force. And again, I didn't know at the time, but we are funded by taxpayer dollars. And so we would love to send you a CD. We'd love to someday, when we're in your community, come in and work with students.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple things there. One is, and I will remind all my listeners that so long as the piece is in the public domain, any recording by a military band is also in the public domain. If the composer has the rights, then you obviously can't use it. But the Air Force and military recordings are free. That's correct, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So seek out the CDs where you can find them, and and then a lot of music is online. So a lot is on YouTube these days, and again, we're working on making sure the licensing and the mechanical licensing and all of that is done correctly. And it's an evolving, as you know, Mark, it's an evolving world out there between licenses and fair use and
no doubt
what we need to do on social media. But lots of great music that's out there.
I sit on both sides of that fence as a composer and a teacher. It's not an uncomfortable spot, but it's important that we pay our creators, and it's also important that we have resources for our teachers and our students. So it's it's one of those things.
Agreed, 100%. And I wanted to, it being the 4th of July, could I also talk about a concert we have coming up online? Is that all right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And if you launch this on the day of the 4th, people should be able to find on our Facebook account, find Air Force Band of the Golden West. We were supposed to perform actually a live event in the city of Sassoon outside of Travis, but it didn't work out with the local conditions and restrictions, which we completely understand. We're all for keeping people safe. So we're launching a broadcast that it's going to be a little expose of the different groups that we have here, from our ceremonial marching band to our rock band, which is called Mobility, and a couple of our quintets. And so come and find us on the 4th of July if you're looking for some fun patriotic music.
Before we go on to my final group of questions, I do have 2 more questions for you, if that's okay.
Sure thing.
The first of these is, you mentioned outreach videos for the quarantine and the COVID-19 that we're all in. And it looks like it's going to be at least another year before we're out of it. I mean, that's just what I'm hearing. I'm not an epidemiologist, everyone. Please take me. This is what I know. Has there been any thought about beginners? Because I know that this is something that's really concerning for a lot of people who teach beginners. The more resources we can have for them, the better, as far as like instrument selection videos, getting started videos, that kind of thing. Just has there been any thought about that among in your community?
Absolutely. Yeah, I have not heard specifically about very beginning, like putting a read on for the first time. But I imagine those resources are out there somewhere, and we certainly have growing by the day. And I'm not just talking about the Air Force bands, but the Marine bands. I see a new post for them daily, also talking about all sorts of instrument capabilities. at least we have the blessing of technology. That is so great of us being able to, help a beginning student just with their own device. And I'm hopeful that that's just, as you said, a temporary season, that we can continue to grow those youngest instrumentalists and vocalists. And then we can be back in larger groups again, making music together, having those communal music-making experiences that are unique to anything else.
The other question is also related to the coronavirus, and probably someone listening 10 years from now is sick of this, right? But it's pertinent to our time, and that's, how are you negotiating rehearsing and music making? Are you having rehearsals? Are you distancing, or are you doing small groups? How's your band handling it?
Yeah, so I'll give it as the context of June 24th of 2020, because this, as you know, the research is ongoing, and there are studies that have been commissioned, and we're watching this every day, literally, and we're listening not only to the performing arts world, but we're listening to our military public health experts also out there, and we're making daily calls about not just live concerts, but ceremonies that we support. We're looking at all those conditions about whether the event is outside, what kind of air circulation is available, what is the distance between the performers, and we're being very cautious. And I can only speak for myself here at our band. Other bands are also being cautious, but in different mission sets and different conditions. So we're moving slow to make sure that we're not putting ourselves at risk, as well as being the reason that an audience would be at risk from just being around and watching us. And so we have, in 3 months, we've gone from being a live performing ensemble, pretty much. Most of the time, probably more than 80% of our job. We were doing some digital streaming before, but that was like once a month. And now we're doing usually 2 performances a week of preparing audio and video and becoming a production center, essentially, for these recorded musical products online. And so, yeah, we're just moving one step at a time. We have not had a large group ensemble indoors. I've read the West Point study and watched what people are doing with plexiglass. It's still early in this phase about the determinants of water vapor and how far that travels, and what we don't know, we still don't know. But I am hopeful. I'm hopeful in the industry of the civilian and government world of finding this vaccine, and we're doing the best that we can to eradicate this, to ride this out. And I am faithful that we'll be able to be back and making music in larger groups again.
Well, hopefully that a year from now we'll have happier news, or that people in the future are listening and thinking, wow, it wasn't so bad. Let's just keep our fingers crossed for that.
Yeah, it's a temptation to be impatient, and that's something I deal with every day, where I just want to go back to normal. I just say, "Where's my fast forward button? Let's get this thing over with." But the prudence of waiting and the safety measures which the Department of Defense has given to us, in addition to our federal guidelines, are going to ultimately, I think, we'll look back and we'll say we're grateful that we were cautious, and I may feel like overcautious right now, but in the prevention of such a volatile and contagious virus, I think it's important.
Hey there, everyone. My name is Anne Molesky, and I'm the host of the Anna Krusik Podcast, another podcast in the Muted Network. It's my mission to help music teachers be more purposeful, sequential, and joyful in each and everything they do as teacher musicians. Join me every Thursday as I share tips, tricks, and meaningful conversations with other music teachers about how to make the general music classroom more intentional and impactful for both you and your students.
Are you ready to get on to the final group of questions?
Sure thing, Mark. Thanks again for your time over there. I know that I'm in a different time zone. It's easier for me on the West Coast.
No problem. And if I forget to say it, thank you for your service, and I really appreciate you coming on the episode.
Of course. Thanks for your support. Thanks for your service to music education.
Where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
Yeah, competition. I think at different times of my life, I think I'd have a different answer. As I've gone through, I was a competitive person. I wanted to be first chair growing up, and I think that did drive me in some ways, in a healthy way, to get better from being a high school student and auditioning for groups, and then getting to college and wanting to, be in the more, the ensemble members that had the most experience. But then I remember also being a student teacher and a really great student teacher who taught at a middle school in Orem, Utah. And she said, Patricia Henderson is her name. And she said, there are no winners or losers in band. And I thought about that. And that was unique in my experience of me, because I think in some ways people drive to get better at music, sometimes to be better than the people around them, sadly. And that can be a driver. That can be a motivation for people in obtaining a skill, not just music, but in otherwise. But I think the earlier that we can talk about the communal music making experience and the beauty that happens in music making with other people, and talk about it more in that way. And yes, it's important to drive and get those skills, and you have to work hard. You can't not work hard and develop as an instrumentalist or as a vocalist or as an audio engineer. That's just necessary to it. But I think it's important that we also reaffirm to students early on that it's not about stepping on one another to try and be the best. So I think that's probably what my answer would be on that. It's healthy at times, and as an educator, I did it. I did both. Sometimes I gave part assignments and I moved students around sections, and then I also had a time in my life where I had chair auditions and playing tests and put people from 1 to N. But thinking back on that, I think that the best approach for me was helping students to have round experiences, challenging them to work hard, but then helping them to see as soon as you can the big picture of being part of something bigger.
All right, this is a tricky one, this question here, and a lot of music teachers especially struggle with this, but how do you find a work-life balance in a career as a musician?
Oh, yeah, I can tell you that my answer about that one has changed over the years as well. From being a single person who was just worried about himself and how I was spending my time in the practice room and otherwise, to now being a father of 5. And in the Air Force, we talk about comprehensive airman fitness. We talk about the 4 pillars between spiritual fitness, mental fitness, emotional fitness, and physical fitness. And I think that that's true in any job and in any career that you have, that we need to be balanced people. And it comes down to how we're treating our bodies, how we're exercising, and the good things that we're putting into our body nutrition-wise, to the good things we're putting into our body also that affect our spirit and our souls. And that's not just necessary religion, but our holistic, everything about our spirit. And then what we're doing to have that balance of mental release also, what we're doing to keep it real. And so I would say finding times to have something completely not about music, I think is important. I've enjoyed reading books about history and having community with a church congregation, and having a social outlet with friends, traveling. Those have been ways to do it. And for me, the more I can involve my family, the better. So the more they're along for the ride and traveling around on Route 1 or 101, going up and down the California coast here, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge because sometimes you do have to work into the night hours. So, I can't say that I'm ever 100% at doing it right. It's a constant recalibration, but it's important. Great question, and so important for music educators, because I think we burn ourselves out too soon sometimes in music education, between grading things and all of the administrative duties that come to being a band or choir director, and they can add up quickly. And just putting a manageable amount of tasks in your planner for one day, I think that's a strategy, and then just leaving the rest for the next day as much as possible. Those are things that I just try and do. Never perfect.
And the next question is a big one, and it's, what are the challenges facing music education, or in your case, the band community, and how can we best meet them?
Oh, that is great also. Thank you for that one. Music education is getting better day to day, and I've been learning a lot as a doctoral student at Boston University and reading a lot about research that's being done in the schools across the country and across the globe, and making music a better social experience as well. I think that bias has existed in our country and in the world for too long, and it continues to go on, prejudice and bias, and a lot of the times it's unconscious. But music education continues to get better as the research is better and people become more aware of the different backgrounds of the people around them. As people see the diversity brings strength, and we recognize people in their backgrounds for the good that they are and the uniqueness that they bring. And part of our the CD that's coming out, the album that we have releasing is called American Tapestry. That's kind of the thought that we wanted to share. We wanted to present these new pieces of music. We have a piece that's about Colonel Guyon Bluford, who's the first African-American astronaut into space. We have a piece called Locrian Riffs, which is dedicated to the Rosie the Riveters of the World War II Greatest Generation again, and the great sacrifice that they went through also through prejudice and danger of working in the shipyards and working as riveters and shipbuilders, and just helping to tell those stories. So I think music has such a powerful ability to bring people together. But music education in the future, yes, we have a ways to go also from what we can do as conductors. I think that generationally, we're growing out of an age of the conductor as the authoritative figure at the front of the group, who is the master of the space. I think it's an important thing that any conductor at any age group empowers the musicians, who latches onto their intelligence and their expertise and inspires and enables a great music making experience, and not just dictating their own thoughts, their own artistry, but is someone that can empower that into one cohesive and beautiful music or event. So those are some of the thoughts that I have. I'm excited for the future of music education.
All right, Joe, if I could build a time machine and transport you back to the afternoon of your high school graduation, what would you tell yourself?
Right. So now we're talking the year 2000. I would tell myself, work really hard, keep doing the things you're doing and develop these skills, but don't forget to enjoy the people along the way. That this life goes really fast, and it seems like the longer I've been at it, the faster it goes. So enjoying those relationships with the people in these various stages from, I still think back fondly during my time as a college undergrad to being a graduate student and being a first year teacher and trying to figure out what in the world, how do I help these students on day one? How do I figure this thing out? Enjoying those parents, enjoying that collegiality. And then the same thing, I think, in life, it's easy for us to always be planning for the next thing. And that might be one unanticipated blessing of this season is we've, by necessity, skidded to a halt. And a lot of our plans, as we were planning on traveling around the region or leaving the country, it's made us so that we can be much more reflective in this time. And so I think I see that as a blessing. Although I'm excited to be done, I'm excited to be able to go out and travel and meet new people again. But I would tell myself to relish the people around me, to grow those relationships, because ultimately that's going to be what matters the most.
All right. So I don't ask this question to be morbid. It's not your deathbed question. It's more about what's most meaningful to you. And if you had a choice, what would be the final work for wind ensemble or band that you would want to conduct, and why?
Ooh. That's a big one too. I've gotten to conduct so many wonderful pieces from I want to say something from film music, but because I certainly love John Williams is a former member of the Air Force band program as well. We had him actually here in California, and so it's fun for us to go and talk about his lineage. Same thing as your father, serving during the era of the Korean War, and his service that he gave during the 1950s, and how that helped him to grow into a fine film career. So I'd probably break it down to 5 or 6 pieces from from the orchestral world to something very wonderfully romantic, Austro-German work, probably Brahms' third. But then in the band world also, from a transcription of William Schuman, the Chester Overture for band, to the rest of the suite, or to the film score to E.T. or Star Wars. I think that there's such great music making that can be done in such a variety of literature. And to include different kind of conducting, but the big band, being in front of a big band too, there's such a great American legacy of music through the big band era. So, we trace our lineage to Major Glenn Miller, and being in front of a big band that's playing in the mood, and watching the group of men and women that lived through the era, the greatest generation, and watching them enjoy the music, watching them dance in front of the stage. I could go to my deathbed and be a happy man if that was if that was my last gig of standing in front of a group like that, or playing in the ensemble, even better.
That is cool. There aren't so many left anymore from that generation.
No, and sadly, I think we need more big bands too. I hope that we keep that tradition alive. I'm excited to see how jazz also evolves in the 21st century, in the 2020s. But I hope the big band continues to be strong, and that we continue to have new groups and new literature, because it's just such a great heritage that we have, and such a powerful contribution to our world music.
Yeah, it's true. The big band is a very uniquely American.
But it's popular across the globe. You ought to see our band in Japan, our Air Force band in Japan. They get great reception in traveling throughout Japan and other places in the world too. People love American jazz.
So we kind of talked about this already, but and we're also in a very odd time. But is there anything coming up that you want to share or promote? I know you mentioned your new CD. Is there anything else?
Right. Yeah. So watch for American Tapestry. Again, from the Air Force Band of the Golden West. Watch for us on Facebook. We're going to have a couple of online releases, little videos, and we're near the end. We're almost at the point where we have all the tracks mastered, so that'll be available for download too. And then patriotic holidays. It's a great opportunity for us also to be in front. You'll see us sometimes at sporting events. I hope we get back into baseball stadiums again. Right here with the 49ers and the A's and the Giants, and hopefully we can be with football. You'll see us out there in football stadiums as well. But yeah, I would also say just even outside of band, to be continually mindful of those that have served in uniform, and I hope that those that are listening in the music education world will even if they're not near a military band, will play patriotic music. We'll use the national anthem. We'll use the great marches, which are such an important part of our American heritage as well. As long as we've had an American military, we've had American military music, and there is just such a unique effect that happens when you start playing a march in front of people.
Oh yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
I hope that always continues.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I'm most proud of here is that I've had, someone from the old guard talking about like fife and drumming in the colonial era, all the way up to musicians like you and Colonel Fettig, who, were playing sort of not only new music, but also like Colonel Fettig talking about the Sousa project that they've done. And I think that's really cool. It's our heritage.
That was a remarkable project. And I would like to say a special shout out to him and the President Owen for that contribution of just a lot of marches and such great thought of what their versions of what the Sousa band would have actually played like. And so, yeah, we have definitely been taking advantage of that. So I'm grateful for the President's Own.
So how can people get in touch with you or the Band of the Golden West?
Oh, great question. So our website has contact information. Our phone number is, if you want to call and ask a question, can certainly do so. I would say that social media is probably the easiest and the fastest way to get a response, whether it's Facebook, sending us a direct message, putting a comment on our page, and just watching as things are going by. Our social media platforms are also so important for us to tell the Air Force story. That's why we have Air Force bands. We are here to celebrate the service of airmen past and present. Here at Travis, we work for what's called Air Mobility Command, which is the Air Force's fleet of cargo planes that fly across the world. And they move people and personnel. Huge pieces of personnel, of equipment, by the way. They are also gas stations in the sky. They provide mid-air refueling to all aircraft, all Air Force jets and other jets in the air. And then also we provide humanitarian relief during times of crisis. During this COVID outbreak, we've been able to provide relief materials, been able to evacuate Americans that were stranded across the globe in different places. So Air Mobility Command is a wonderful command for us to work for and represent and to serve our General Officer, General Marianne Miller. We're proud of her service and the command that she leads.
Well, Major Hansen, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. And again, thanks for this podcast. I think it's a remarkable thing that music educators have a place where they can go and get a little bit, some tips, some professional development, some different expertise or different perspectives of what people have been through. And again, I see myself equal to anybody else who's listening to this podcast of trying to figure out what is the best way to lead a group of musicians, what's the best way to develop the young people of our country and to continue to use music as a tool for good in society. So I offer myself, if anybody's listening, if you want to contact me and through the Air Force Band with Golden West page, I'd be happy to talk and help where we can.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate that. I certainly have tried to give something back to the community that has given me so much. That's for sure.